Bro, the whole history of money is basically humans agreeing to worship a rock. Not even a useful rock, just a shiny one that refuses to die. But that's the insane part, right? Gold did not become money because it was practical. It became money because everyone collectively got seduced by glitter. I mean, fair enough, humans are extremely predictable when something looks expensive. Still, the weirdest part is how little gold we're even talking about. If all the gold ever mined fits in one cube, that is kind of humiliating. I thought it would look like a whole mountain, not a fancy office sculpture. And then 45% just goes into jewelry and decoration. So basically the planet dug up divine, shiny stuff for necklaces and statues. Extremely efficient species, us. But okay, why gold specifically and not some other metal that actually does something? Because it is rare, durable, divisible, and weirdly beautiful in a way people trust. See, trust is doing a lot of heavy lifting there. Trust is the most expensive material on Earth, apparently. But first, the origin story is almost more absurd than the value story. Gold is basically exploded star leftovers from asteroids hitting Earth. That makes gold sound less like a commodity and more like a cosmic accident. Like the universe tossed tiny trophies into the planet and we found them later. And then humans immediately said, yes, we need to put that in a vault. I love that it stayed buried for billions of years and then rivers just exposed it. Earth really was doing delivery service for ancient treasure. Free shipping from geology. That one is too good, man. What gets me is the material science angle, because gold is just annoyingly perfect. It does not rust, does not corrode, and is soft enough to shape. So even nature made it look luxurious and practical at the same time. That is unfair engineering, honestly. And then different civilizations basically independently fell in love with it. China, India, the Inca, the Greeks, everybody looked at gold and said, yes, that is sacred. The Inca calling it the sun's sweat is such a clean metaphor. Honestly, that is better branding than anything modern finance has ever done. Modern finance is just Excel with better marketing. And then the uses get more interesting than just jewelry. It was ritual, decoration, medicine, coins, temples, all of it. Some Chinese emperors even ate gold trying to become immortal, which is one of the more aggressive ways to misunderstand chemistry. Bro, imagine dying because you were committed to immortality. But that tells you something important. People did not just value usefulness. They valued symbolism, purity, power, and the feeling of forever. Which is exactly why it was so easy for gold to become money. Because once people agree it is valuable, the metal becomes portable trust. That phrase is actually insane. Portable trust. Sounds like a startup that raised too much money. Portable Trust Series B, billion-dollar valuation, no product. Before gold, people used all kinds of stuff as money, which is wild. Cattle, barley, salt, whatever a society broadly accepted and could move around. Cows as money is such a chaotic concept. A wallet with legs is objectively terrible infrastructure. But cattle actually made sense in a survival economy. They were useful, alive, and directly tied to food and labor. The problem is they are hard to divide and impossible to store neatly. Also extremely inconvenient when your paycheck runs away. That should be in every economics textbook. Gold solved a different problem. It was useful enough to trust, useless enough to not spoil. That is the whole trick. It sits in this weird middle zone. Not food, not shelter, not clothing, but still desirable. And because it was rare, it could carry value without flooding everywhere. But then the gold rushes happened, and humans became completely unhinged. Suddenly it was not about calm value anymore. It was conquest and greed. Entire regions got reshaped because people wanted more of a metal. That is the part everybody romanticizes and nobody likes to sit with. The shiny coin story hides a lot of violence underneath it. History loves a beautiful object right before it gets horrific. That is depressingly accurate. Once empires scaled up, gold became tied to state power, trade, and taxation. Then coins made it easier because people could count value instead of hauling random goods, which is honestly one of humanity's best inventions if you ignore all the blood. And later banknotes were basically a trust receipt for gold, right? Exactly. Paper became a promise that the metal sat somewhere safe. That is such a human move, taking something solid and making a system around it. We cannot just own things, we have to build bureaucracy around them. If it is not complicated, did it even count? Exactly. We are allergic to simplicity. And then the gold standard tried to make the whole thing feel anchored. Money was tied to gold, which made currencies feel stable and real. Until governments wanted more flexibility and the whole illusion got stretched. Because real economies do not behave like a neat vault full of bars. They behave like chaos with invoices. Chaos with invoices is exactly modern civilization. What is interesting now is that gold never actually disappeared from power structures. Governments still buy it, investors still buy it, central banks still care. Russia and China buying huge amounts says a lot. If gold were truly obsolete, nobody would be stockpiling it like that. And when prices hit records after political comments about central banks, people notice fast. Turns out the ancient metal still reacts to modern drama. It has survived empires, so a few headlines will not scare it. That is why the whole "gold is dead" take feels lazy. It is not about daily spending anymore, it is about confidence and backup value. People reach for it when paper starts feeling abstract. Because trust, once again, is the real currency. We keep circling back to the same thing, just in nicer packaging. That Florida idea of bringing gold back as real money feels almost theatrical. Like, imagine trying to buy coffee with a gold flake. The barista would simply leave the country. Fair. But that instinct makes sense in a weird way because people want something tangible. Especially when the world feels unstable, gold becomes emotional insurance. Not because it grows, just because it survives. That is actually the deeper lesson here. Gold is valuable because humans never stopped agreeing it should be. The object is real, but the money part is collective imagination. The most powerful thing in finance is still shared hallucination, basically. Very elegant hallucination, but still. And somehow, that hallucination built temples, coins, vaults, and wars. Which is why gold still matters, even when nobody is buying groceries with it. It sits there as proof that trust can harden into matter. That is a terrifyingly poetic sentence, by the way. I know, I hate how good it sounds. Fine, gold wins the argument again. Not by being useful, just by being unforgettable. And maybe that is the real flex, surviving every system we invent. Yeah, because it was never just metal. It was always belief, status, fear, and permanence mixed together. Honestly, that is the messiest money origin story ever, and also the most human one. Wait, that is such a brutal origin story for money. We basically said, this rock looks important, let's run civilization on it. Which is hilarious because gold does not do anything for you. It does look expensive though, which apparently counted for a lot. That is the weirdest part, right? Its value is almost social before it is economic. Exactly. Trust gets layered on top, and then the metal becomes a system. Imagine explaining that to a goat herder back then. No, I swear this shiny thing is better than 3 goats. And somehow people were like, fair enough. But the practical stuff matters too, because it is easy to carry and split. Yeah, unlike cattle, which are basically mobile drama. Mobile drama is the perfect economic term for cows. Gold also does not rot, rust, or complain, which is a huge advantage. You cannot say that about most assets or most people. Okay, that was cold. And the rarity is the whole game, because if it were everywhere, nobody cares. Right, it had to feel scarce enough to matter, but not so scarce it was useless. That balance is actually insane when you think about it. Then there is the beauty part, which people pretend is decorative, but it is not. Beauty is economics when humans agree beauty means power. So basically we monetized vibes. We absolutely monetized vibes. And those vibes turned into crowns, temples, funerals, and coins. I think that is where the psychology gets interesting. If a ruler wears gold, the gold is not just metal anymore. It becomes proof that this person can command resources, or proof they just stole it from everyone else. Also that, very often. That is why gold and conquest keep showing up in the same sentence. The gold rushes were basically civilization on steroids and bad decisions. Every story like that starts with opportunity and ends with cannons. Yeah, the greed part shows up immediately. Mines get opened, land gets taken, people get displaced, and somehow that gets called progress. That word does a lot of work for a very ugly process. And then the same metal gets polished into something noble-looking. Civilization loves a good cleanup job. Seriously, we take a messy extraction story and end up with a wedding ring. Which is why the emotional meaning of gold is so strong. It can mean love, wealth, divinity, power, and even memory at once. But the money part is still the most wild to me. Because money only works if a large group keeps pretending together. Pretending together is such a savage description of an economy. It is, but it is also true. If tomorrow nobody wanted gold, it would still be shiny and mostly pointless. The metal did not change, the collective agreement did. Which makes the whole thing feel more fragile than people admit. Exactly, and that is why governments hoard it when things get shaky. They are not buying jewelry, they are buying credibility. Expensive credibility, but still. Very expensive credibility. And when central banks buy gold, they are basically saying, we do not fully trust the room. That is why the China and Russia part matters so much. It is not just shopping, it is geopolitical hedging. Which sounds boring until you realize it is nations running a giant trust test. Yeah, and the Trump Fed stuff pushing prices up shows how sensitive it is. The moment people think institutions are wobbling, gold wakes up. Because gold is the thing people run to when they do not want promises. They want something physical, something ancient, something that feels outside politics. Even though, ironically, gold is deeply political. The most apolitical-looking object is doing the most politics. That contradiction is the whole story. And then there is the modern use, which is so much less glamorous. Teeth fillings and electronics are very unromantic compared to temples. Imagine telling an ancient emperor his gold ends up in a phone. They would think we were insane, but they would also understand the durability part. Because gold conducts well, resists corrosion, and keeps working. So even when it is not money, it is still useful. Exactly, and that is why it never fully disappears. It sits there like civilization's emergency battery. That is such a good metaphor. And because it is old, people assume it is safe. Old does not always mean safe, though. True, but in finance, age buys trust the way youth never can. That might be why gold survives every innovation cycle. Every new financial miracle eventually meets an old shiny rock. And the shiny rock is still here, not impressed. Honestly, the deepest lesson is that humans need symbols as much as substances. Gold became both at the same time, which is why it can be useless and indispensable in the same breath. That is such a human invention. We built a whole moral and economic universe around a metal from space. That is actually crazy when you say it out loud. Space dust became central banking somehow. And maybe that is why it still matters now, even after all the systems changed. Because the systems changed, but uncertainty did not. Yeah, and uncertainty always sends people back to gold. Back to the shiny rock, back to the ancient cheat code. It is kind of beautiful, in a weird way. Beautiful, greedy, violent, sacred, and practical all at once. The most overloaded object in human history. And somehow we still act surprised when it refuses to go away. Gold is just sitting there, surviving our nonsense. That is honestly the healthiest attitude in the room. It is hilarious that the most useless-looking thing became the backup plan for civilization. Like, it does not feed you, it does not protect you, and yet everyone agreed it matters. Collective hallucination, but with excellent branding. Exactly, and the branding is literally just sparkle. But that sparkle had chemistry on its side, because it did not corrode or vanish. That is the wild part, right? It stayed itself across centuries. Most stuff in history turns into dust, and gold is like, nope, I am still here. So humans looked at immortality and said, yes, I want that on my neck. And on my temple, and in my tomb, and probably in my ego. That is where it gets interesting, because value started as admiration before it became money. Right, first it is sacred, then it is status, then suddenly it is a system. Civilization really does love taking a shiny object and over-engineering it. And once enough people believe it, the shiny object starts running the economy. That trust part is the whole game, honestly. Because gold itself does not do anything, but people do things for it. Which is somehow more dangerous than usefulness. Yeah, because the second it becomes a universal store of value, it becomes political. And then the governments show up, and everything gets weird. Governments always arrive when something valuable becomes portable. Portable wealth is basically an invitation. That is why gold moved from jewelry to coins to vaults. And not because people suddenly loved accounting. Definitely not because humans were like, let us simplify. It was more like, we need something the other person will take without arguing. Exactly. And gold became that thing because it was rare, divisible, and recognizable. Divisible is underrated, by the way, because you cannot split a cow politely. That sentence should not be as funny as it is. A truly tragic asset class. And useless for long-distance trade unless you want a very weird caravan. Gold solved the portability problem, and that changed everything. But then you get the bigger twist, which is that banks and states start hoarding it. Of course they do, because if everyone trusts it, everyone wants to control it. That is the tension at the center of gold history. Trust makes it money, and power makes people fight over it. And then you get gold rushes, which are basically human greed with boots on. Human greed with transportation is a great description. Those rushes were not just economics, they were conquest engines. People hear gold, and suddenly every moral limit gets very flexible. Ethics becomes optional when someone whispers, treasure. And the transcript really makes that clear, because gold helped fuel empire building. Which is such an ugly mirror, because the same thing people called beautiful financed violence. That contradiction is the whole story. I keep thinking about the fact that most of the gold is just sitting in vaults now. Like, New York and London are basically giant sleepovers for bars. Gold in a vault is the most expensive bored object imaginable. It traveled the world to end up in a drawer. And yet that is exactly why people trust it, because it is not trying to be useful. Its uselessness is part of the trust signal. Wait, that sounds backward, but it is not actually backward. Right, because if something is not consumed, it can preserve value across time. So the no-fun item wins. The boring asset outlived the exciting ones. And now governments are buying it again, which tells you the anxiety never disappeared. Russia, China, even places like Florida trying weird experiments. It is all part of that. Florida trying to make gold feel normal again is such a sentence. It feels like a state version of nostalgia. But the reason is obvious, because when currencies wobble, gold looks emotionally honest. Emotionally honest is a great phrase for a rock. The most emotionally honest rock on Earth. I also love that its appeal is partly ancient and partly modern tech. Yeah, jewelry and temple walls on one side, electronics on the other. And dental fillings, because apparently your mouth also needs luxury. Imagine telling an ancient king that gold is also in your teeth. He would probably think we have lost the plot. Maybe, but he would still recognize the logic because permanence is attractive. That is why it kept showing up in rituals too, right? Yeah, because humans link what lasts with what is holy. And gold lasts in a way people wish they could. That is probably why it gets so much emotional weight. Do you think gold would still be this powerful if we had never built paper money? Probably, because even before paper, it was already doing the symbolic work. But paper made the trust more abstract, which is kind of insane. We went from holding metal to holding promises. And then we called that progress. Which, honestly, it is progress if the promise is strong enough. But the minute the promise weakens, everyone looks back at gold. Like a panic reflex. Exactly, gold becomes the thing people run toward when institutions feel shaky. So it is not old-fashioned, it is anti-panic. Anti-panic is a hilarious financial product. And that is why the story ends without really ending. Because the same metal that decorated gods is still sitting in reserve sheets. It never stopped being part symbol, part asset, part obsession. Basically, the most stubborn character in human history. Yeah, and every time we think we have outgrown it, the world gets nervous again. Then the shiny rock walks back in like it owns the place. Because weirdly, it kind of does. That is the whole joke and the whole tragedy. And maybe that is why it still matters so much.